Alright everyone, this is Ash. Welcome back to The King's Speech. So have a couple of plans for read-throughs video stuff today, so I'll kind of just do a quick TLDR rundown before we dive into the review video here. So this weekend plan is to get out, as you know, I've noticed the One Piece review video I'm doing right now. I did want to get this out when the chapter dropped, but I got lazy and I wanted to let the hype die down a little bit before talking about it. So I figured I'd wait till then. It's not a super lot I really had just want to talk about with regards to this chapter, but something specific with regards to the Marines I wanted to talk about that I forgot to bring up in my last chapter review, so I figured I might as well cover it with this one. So apart from that, also going to get to a Yona of the Dawn read through today as well as finally getting around to doing some Kane Banashi reaction chapters. So look forward to that. And this time I'm going to actually try something new with these videos, which is saying if you like my content, please do like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Yeah, because I could really use a little bit of that boost in the channel to try to kind of get some momentum going. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some things happening with that. Yes, with all that said, let us dive straight into the One Piece chapter 1053 review. With translation Stephen Paul, lettering by Vanessa Satone. I don't know if we got a chapter title. Yeah, chapter title of New Emperors. So I'll do my usual thing. I'll go through like all the pages and then talk about what I want to talk about. I'm going to leave the Marine stuff until the end because I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth, more so than the other things. But yeah, that's one thing I specifically want to touch on because I feel like the Marines at this point, like, Oda has done them a disservice, and I feel like some events in this chapter were meant to kind of re-establish them as a credible threat or force, going into kind of the end game of the series, but like I said, we'll talk about that at the end. I'm also probably going to get a lot of hate for saying I don't really care for or about Morgan's. Like, I know he's hugely popular in the fandom for some reason, but I don't know, I just don't care for him or don't understand where his popularity is coming from. The bounty stuff, I know a lot of people are talking about this. Again, this feels like, I've seen a lot of the justification on Twitter being like, oh, Big Mom and Kaido's combined bounties close to... sorry, quick digression before I continue, because I keep forgetting to mention this every time I record a video. I do have a fan running. It has been intensely warm this last couple of weeks, I want to say, but especially this last week's been really, really warm. I've had to have a fan running constantly, but like I've mentioned the past couple of videos I've done, as long as I'm talking or whenever I'm talking, it doesn't drown me out. It shouldn't be like too distracting or anything like that, but in case there's a lull and you hear some kind of noise in the background, that's what it is, but like I said, shouldn't be too much of an interference. Back to what yeah. So a lot of people are pointing out the Kaido and Big Mom's combined bounties are close to 9 billion, so the fact, that all three of the Emperor, or not three of the Emperors, all three of the Supernova took them down, like they basically split the bounty equally between all of them to kind of even it out. And they're trying to use that as a justification for, like, why they all have the same bounty, even though Luffy should have the higher bounty. Because I know a lot of fans are predicting that, Oda would do some play on numbers with him having like a 5 billion, 6 million bounty, like, 56 being the Gomu number. So they're saying, like, it'd be something related to that. But again, like, so there's two kind of things I want to specifically touch on with this. One being that at this stage in the story, for me specifically anyway, I don't think bounties really mean or that much or matter that much in the grand scheme of things. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, there's still a lot of hype surrounding it, etc., but like at this point, just slapping a large number on there isn't really doing anything for me. Like, it's not getting me excited at this point in the story. Be like, oh my god, I can't believe, bounty's gotten this high, because it's so arbitrary at this point. Like, bounties have always been kind of like an arbitrary thing, and the fact that bounty hunters were never really established as a credible force or threat in the series kind of diminish the value of bounties. So, just tossing a huge number out there is kind of like, yeah, like once upon a time, like early on in the series, it kind of did, it was a hype and storytelling tool, because it was used as a measuring stick of sorts. Like it wasn't a great tool for measurement, like of measuring like the different capacities or threat values of different characters, but at least like earlier on in the series was a little bit better of an assessment for kind of gauging the character's growth to their journey, the threat they pose to the world, things like that, their importance, and so on. But I feel like the further we've gotten into the new world, that value has diminished a lot, especially considering like how little screen time or development Oda's really given to Luffy's rivals. Like I think that's part of the reason why Law and Kid having the same bounty and Oda kind of basically implying that they're basically all on the same level doesn't really hit. Is we know from the Kaido fight that Luffy's like now miles, even though they've all awakened their devil fruits. Even though they're supposed to be playing on the same playing field, Luffy's bounded so far ahead of them. It's kind of hard to buy the credibility of Oda trying to sell the fact that oh yeah, Luffy and or not Luffy, sorry, Kid and Law are Luffy's rivals. They're the top contenders for Pirate King. Like Oda has not done enough to make Luffy, or I keep saying Luffy, I don't know why I keep forgetting Law's name, to make Law and Kid seem like credible contenders for the throne. So, yeah, I don't know. I could probably do a deeper analysis on that, but I just want to kind of touch on it and really, I don't think I can go too much deeper into it with this chapter, and I don't want to digress too much. I just want to talk about that quickly. Apu kind of being like, the rat that kind of just worms his way into people's good graces again. Feels like it was done a little bit too easily, like everything he did, like all the betrayals are forgiven a little bit too easily, but Oda's kind of had that be a thing that he's been doing a lot of the New World as well, so not really surprising. The party stuff, usually this would be one of the highlights of the end of an arc, but given how lackluster Wano was, like given how little I care about the scabbards, the Wano citizens, like just the overall conflict itself, I think this is like the party thing where it's like, yeah, you have to kind of go through the obligatory motions, like, yeah, the battle's over, of course, we're gonna have a huge party, blah, 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 but it just doesn't land with the same impact for me that past ones have hit with, which brings us to the thing which I called years and years ago, and I honestly don't think I got enough credit for calling this. I'll put the tweet down in the description for this video just so you can all see. But back in 2018, I called that we were going to see Wano, or we're going to see Pluton on Wano, and lo and behold, almost 5 years later, we finally got confirmation that yes, Pluton is on Wano. Suck it, everyone that was fucking just going on me for being a theorist back then and thinking I wasn't being, I wasn't able to call it and all my criticisms are Oda because the story wasn't going my way. The spite from, my validation every time I get one of these theories right keeps me going. But yeah, I just wanted to point it out. I called it. Don't get enough appreciation for that. But yeah, I think this was by far the best part of the chapter was the confirmation that Pluton is indeed on Wano. A lot of people have also called that, Sukiyaki was in fact the Tengu, especially because of the Kokeshi dolls. Because I know a lot of people are pointing out that in the Oden flashback, you saw Sukiyaki kind of playing within painting the dolls, so good on everyone who called that. But again, the fact that Sukiyaki is alive, I feel like the level of outrage it should receive should be on the same level as everyone that was annoyed about the Sabo amnesia explanation for how Sabo survived all those years, like why he didn't ever try to connect with Ace or Luffy. I feel like the justification for Sukiyaki also being like oh, I was imprisoned all this time for several years, and then when I finally got out, it was so changed. I was, thinking of committing suicide because it felt so bad. It definitely feels like that level of excuse for Oda to be like, oh, this is why Sukiyaki would, just kept himself hidden all this time and never told his grandkids, like, hey, Grandpa's still alive, etc. And I feel like the only justification for why Oda has kept him around, uh, and reintroduced him, been like, oh, he's alive all this time, is because someone needs to pass on the knowledge of, how to read the poneglyphs and how to create poneglyphs to Momonosuke if he's going to, actually take over the Kozuki lineage. So I feel like that's the sole reason Oda had him survive. Because I feel like if he had done it as like, oh, Oda wrote him like a textbook or a journal explaining how to do it, it wouldn't have had the same impacts. I feel like, shoehorning Sukiyaki back in there would kind of be a better justification, I guess. But yeah, I don't buy that Orochi wouldn't have killed him and just kept him in prison for reasons. Like, I don't buy that. But we'll see what the explanation for that eventually ends up being. Like I said, his excuses of like, oh, everything was changed, like blah blah, really doesn't land. But yeah, called this. I also think I mentioned that Robin did know, because when I reread Alabasta, I did mention also that Robin knew where Pluton was at some point. So yeah, one last theory I guess for that regards to that before we move on to other stuff. I still am partially on the theory idea that Blackbeard is going to show up and he's going to be the one to commandeer Pluton and take it. Because I'm still of the mind, I do still support the theory I tossed out that by the end of the series, each faction, the Marines, Luffy's group of pirates, and then Blackbeard's group and his allies are all going to be in control of one of the ancient weapons. And I feel like Blackbeard's going to have Pluton, Luffy and Co are going to have Poseidon, and then the world government will find out where Uranus is and they'll be able to utilize that as their thing. So I'll see if I'm right on that. Because yeah, I still think it's weird that Blackbeard is apparently making a move somewhere in those 2 weeks, and we didn't know where or where he was going. Especially given that Moria was, also allying with him or was close to him at that point. Because again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for Oda to have kept Moria alive and hanging around, and then have reintroduced him into the story, meeting up with Blackbeard. And I feel like this is one of those things that got cut because Oda just realized he didn't have enough time to... Well, I feel like it got cut, A, because Oda realized he didn't have enough time and this arc was already running longer than he wanted it to, and B, because he wanted to, keep the outside, like keep events outside of Wano's secret, and didn't want to reveal it to the reader just so he can have, like, a surprise bonanza at the end of the arc. But yeah, I feel like not having Moria get closure with Kaido's defeat was definitely a weak point of Wano, and kind of brings up the question of like, why did you keep Moria around if you weren't going to involve him in Kaido's downfall, given like his ties to him? But that'll be a discussion saved for another video once I get around to eventually doing like a whole full-scale analysis of Wano. But yeah, I suspect, because I think a lot of people also said this, I suspect that Pluton is built above, like Wano's built above Pluton. So whenever it gets liberated, commandeered, like Wano will basically be forced to open its borders because the waterfalls will no longer be protecting it. But we'll see what happens with that. Which I guess brings us to the thing that a lot of people are more hype about in this chapter, which I don't really understand, but I guess, power scalers are kind of having a field day with this. And with regards to that, I'm also of two minds, but we'll talk about the introduction first before we get into that. So yeah, we'll finally get the introduction to Green Bull, in all his glory. We find out what his powers are. or at least we get a preview of what his powers are, as he basically decimates uh, Kaido's forces. And I have to say, out of all the Admiral designs we've gotten so far, I'm the most disappointed with Green Bull because of how lackluster it is. Because apart from, like the famous actor face that he's given, like, he looks too generic compared to the other admirals. Like, there's nothing really that makes him stand out character design wise from a lot of the other characters. And I think it's also because we just had a glut of kind of like what I want to call like biker daddy kind of characters introduced in recent arcs, which I think kind of lessens his impact. So yeah, like apart from the face, being like distinctive because of the actor Oda based on, like there's really isn't a lot to set Green Bull apart from like the other admirals, even a lot of the other prominent, powerful characters. And I think part of that disappointment is given how he was introduced, as being like this guy that's like, oh, was looking almost scraggly and being like, oh, I haven't eaten in 3 years, etc., etc. I think I was expecting someone that looked a lot more like Venom in, or Tom Hardy in Venom. This guy that just looks like he's sick, sweaty, like he just looks like he's having a bad time. I think if Greenville had looked like that, if he looked a little bit more disarming and unassuming, I think that would have been more impactful and would have been, especially with him taking out, Kaido's underlings so easily. I think that would have made this more impactful than, you know, making him look like a biker Chad. So, yeah, I don't like. Honestly, I don't think Oda did enough, given like how long he waited to introduce Greenville formula. I don't think he made him distinctive enough to stand out. But well, yeah, we'll see how his character actually plays out, because I think the one surprising like deviation from what we expected is in one of those SBSs, someone had told Oda, I think this was because it was based on Momotaro saying that, hey, based on this, they're expecting that they're asking Oda basically, are Green Bull and Fujitora going to be, going against the government because they don't support it because of, the tale of Momotaro and everything in that. And Oda was doing like his fake, like Luffy trying to lie, pursing his lips and being like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Sweat, 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 sweat. Like that Key and Peele skit where he's just like, sweating buckets is kind of like doing that to try to pretend like, oh, no, you didn't get that. You didn't predict that, Baka. So the fact that apparently Aramaki Green Bull is, Akainu's little lapdog, is kind of like, oh, is Akainu going to praise me if I bring in Straw Hats? Like, oh, man, like, I have to make a good impression on Sakazuki. So I wonder if that's a recent change Oda made, because he's like, yeah, that was since people predicted it, I want to be, unpredictable and surprising. We'll see how that actually plays out with one of the things at the end of this chapter I want to talk about specifically. But yeah, apart from that, I think a lot of people predict that Green Bull is going to have some kind of plant powers. Like, we don't have the full name yet of what specifically it is, but I know a lot of people are saying, an Ent Logia or an Entozoan, maybe a plant Logia. I know a lot of people are now, because of Luffy being the sun god, are saying, oh, what if he's got the mythical Zoan, like forest god or something. But yeah. Actually, no, do I want to touch on that now, or do I want to touch on that? I'll touch on that at the end with the marine stuff, actually, yeah. Yeah, like I said, get more party scenes. Again, I don't give a shit. Like, it just does not have the same impact given how abruptly this arc ended. Like, there's no real sense of catharsis with the partying scene. It just kind of feels like, end of the arc, obligatory party scene has to be thrown in. We're going through the motions. I don't think anyone was again surprised with what the new four emperors were. I think a lot of people were expecting Law and Kid also to be included. I didn't think that was going to happen. I think a lot of people were calling Buggy, with the whole failing upwards bit. So it's not a huge surprise that, of course, they were going to be the new emperors. honestly, I kind of feel like they should have just at this point kind of abandoned the idea of emperors. They really wanted to make Wano kind of the tipping or turning point to, this new era in piracy history, and like with all like with Lost Speech, what Punk has about the gears being disrupted and changed and destroyed and all that. I feel like destroying the old system would have been more symbolic of that rather than perpetuating the whole emperor thing for another arc or saga or whatnot, especially since the warlord system has been abolished as well. And since that was supposed to be one of the linchpins of the forces, the Marines, the Emperors, the Warlords being kind of the trifecta of force that are keeping the world in balance, getting rid of one and then for some reason arbitrarily keeping the other two feels like an odd choice, especially when two of the Emperors went down in the same arc. I feel like, if the Marines are serious about their whole, like, oh, we have to do a cleansing thing, just burn the system to the ground, rebuild it up again. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, the reason I brought up like the whole Green Bull being an Akainu flunky is interesting because a lot of people when they're theorizing about Green Bull's Logia or like plant-based powers, a lot of people, myself included, were theorizing that if he was going to turn out to be a good guy like Fujitora, if he was going to be on the Allied side, he would basically use his grasp plant powers like in like a mass display of like force. I guess it's not really force, but like in a mass display, kind of like what he's doing right now. Just like restoring the greenery back to Wano after like all the pollution and the stuff from basically redoing what the pollution and the stuff from the factories had done. And so the fact that just his mere presence seems to be like already doing that to the land is interesting, considering again that he is Akainu's flunky. So is he going to end up just inadvertently like restoring the greenery just because his powers are acting subconsciously, or is he going to be like able to stop, and is it going to be like a destructive battle played out with that? But yeah, we'll see with all that said. So with all that said, I didn't even notice like the gag with Luffy like doing the Google like Looney Tunes eyes out of the thing, but I feel like at this point Oda's just overusing it a little bit already. Alright, so with that said, now I finally want to talk about stuff with the Marines I wanted to talk about. And I think I want to talk about that specifically is the one thing is like there's been a lot of debate about, the power scaling with like, oh, does Green Bull, taking Hokkaido's forces make them look bad? Is Oda messing with the power scaling? Like there's been a lot of like back and forth trying to justify how Green Bull was so easily able to take out Kaido and Co. And like, on the other hand, people being like, oh, well, Kaido and Co are still recovering, because you see, I believe King still has like, bandages wrapped around him and everything. So people are being like, oh, there's Kaido and Co are still recovering. They're in the prison. Maybe they have sea stone cuffs on, and that's why Green Bull's able to deal with them so easily, etc., etc. And then that's going to spiral a little into debate about, well, the captain of a crew has always been, kind of head and shoulders above the commander. So of course, it makes sense that the admirals who are kind of at the pinnacle of the Marines would be on the same level as the captains of the separate pirate crews. So it makes sense that their strength would be in the similar range. And people are saying like based on how Marco was able to kind of hold off King and Queen by himself, like there's justification there for Green Bull being able to take on both of them relatively easily, with his powers. I'm kind of in a mixed camp with regards to that, because I'm like, yeah, I can buy all the justifications, be like, the admirals are supposed to be the cream of the crops. Of course, they had, a super lot of trouble with some Goonies and underlings. It would kind of make the Marines, look bad. But I think this is also part of the problem with how Oda has set up the system in the first place, with the whole trifecta of the warlords and the emperors having to balance the warlords and the marines having to balance out the power of the emperors in one aspect, and then in the other, I think the problem is that I think Odo specifically with Green Bull also went a little bit far to the edge to try and reestablish. I don't know, far to the edge. Like he's gone to the end of the bell curve to try and reestablish the Marines as a threat. And I think the problem with this stems back to something, an issue I've had with a lot of post-time script I hadn't really had the opportunity to kind of talk about. And that's how passive Akainu has been, which to me has gone against a lot of his character that was established back in Marineford and prior to that. Because Akainu, we know, has always been very kind of, gung ho and forceful and kind of take charge and command. And I feel like the point of establishing that, one of the big threats, the big changes that the world had faced during the 2 years that, Luffy had been hidden away on training with Raleigh, was Akainu having taken over the Marines instead of Aokiji. Because again, Aokiji opposed Akainu becoming Fleet Admiral because he felt like, having him in command would be detrimental because he would go, be too forceful, too militaristic in his pursuit of, justice and eradicating pirates and all that. And I don't feel like Oda has really delivered on that. Like, it feels like he's defanged Akainu because he's been kind of trying to set up the story beats that he needs before he kind of reestablishes, the Marines as a threat, and before he kind of has them moving along or around. And I think that's been detrimental to the series and to his character, because for most of the post times, Akainu has just been kind of passively sitting there and being played on and clowned on by, the Gorosei, by Morgans, who like leaking out leaking out the news from Dressrosa, where it's like, oh, Doflamingo got taken down, he's out of the warlords, and then having the Gorosei tell him like, oh no, it wasn't actually this, with the weapons dealing happening under his nose. With like, I can't even remember what the hell the last thing the Gorosei told him about, but yeah, but like there's just been like a precedent of like Akainu just always having been behind the ball and like kind of learning secrets like as they come out and kind of like making him look bad as Fleet Admiral. And I think the real kicker was when he said like, when Kizaru was like, oh, should I go to Wano and kind of handle this with the two emperors? And Akainu's like, no, we don't have the military force to spare right now. Because again, like, what was the point of having the Marines do the world conscription if somehow that still wasn't enough to muster enough human resources for them to actually be able to, carry out their mission or carry out whatever plans Akainu has? Like, it just feels like this weird disconnect where Oda wants to feel like, oh, the Marines are still, like a credible threat or force, but then failing to actually have them act or deliver on that threat of being like a credible force. And again, some of it feels like, he's going to try to like backtrack on that a little bit by establishing like, once the Straw start finding out what happened in the world, during the time that they were stuck in Wano for the month, like finding out the warlords dissolved, finding out about the new marine science weapon, etc., whatever. But, it feels like a case of like the damage is done, and sure, now you can try to mitigate some of it, but it's not going to fully kind of reconcile, fully going to kind of erase the damage. But yeah, so that's why I feel like, that's why Oda had Green Bull take out King and Queen so easily as like a show of force, and just kind of bash in on them. Was like he was trying to establish like, yeah, the Marines are still a threat. They're gonna kind of come roaring back with a vengeance. Don't count them out yet, but again, like early on in the series, like one of like Smoker was a credible threat for like most of the early part of the series. Like every time he went after Luffy, he's like, oh man, he's like, this guy's after him. He's gonna get him. Like he felt like credible specter that was always gonna be like close to derailing their plans, and it hasn't felt like any of that has really happened post time skip as much. So we'll see if that changes with Green Bull, but I don't know because again, people are also pointing this out on Twitter because again, like even with Green Bull having taken out King and Queen so easily, I don't think that is I don't think that made people think that like, oh no, Luffy's in danger now, or the Straw Hats are in danger, considering that he managed to take out Kaido, considering they managed to take out Big Mom, who were both considered monsters in their own right. Kaido especially, being like, the strongest creature on the planet, being like, oh, one-on-one fight always been on Kaido. After having established all of that, it doesn't feel like having Green Bull come in and take out King and Queen really makes him you know, stand out as a threat, someone that could possibly potentially threaten Luffy, especially since he's had like a week to recover and he's presumably back at full energy again. Like it doesn't feel like Green Bull is going to be able to easily take him out. But like I said, we'll see what happens in the next couple of chapters. We'll see if Oda, now that Wano's over, now that he's had a chance to rest and recuperate, if he'll able to be kind of go back to his roots, so to speak. Kind of get back to the prime golden age of writing that he used to do. But yeah, I wanted to mention that last, specific last chapter, because the fact that Morgans is just clowning on the Gorosei again. We're supposed to have, sorry, I forgot to bring up the Gorosei, but the Gorosei were supposed to have been, like playing the puppet master, machinating like all these cleanses before, keeping the world in balance for presumably hundreds of years since the Void Century. The fact that they're getting clowned on by Morgans so easily, he's so easily able to undermine their authority, definitely makes them look incompetent. And I don't know if that's the thing that I don't know if Oda was going for that. It just inadvertently happened. But either way, it's just not a good look. And I think he's realized that and he's trying to like kind of, shift the compass away from that direction. But again, damage is done. We'll see how he tries to put out the fires, how well he does it. Like I mentioned, I think in the last video, I'm going to try to get back to doing the weekly reaction reviews for One Piece now that Wano has almost finally ended. Hopefully only a couple of more chapters left, especially because we should be getting to the post-arc stuff, which usually tends to be the best content in most of the arc's cases, and I think especially in Wano, that'll be the case. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I'll try to get my reactions for that out there. Oh yeah, spread a little bit longer than I expected, but I hope you all did enjoy this video. As I mentioned at the beginning, please do like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help out a lot. Expect some Akane Banashi and the Yona read-throughs to hit the channel sometime later today as well. And until next time, this is Ash. I'll talk to you all later.